Chodesh Tov, and good evening, and happy month of Adar that starts tonight with all of its incredible, abundant blessings for all of us. Tonight we are going to continue the class that I gave last week. Last week, the first one called Bricks of Sapphire, part 1. This is part 2 of Bricks of Sapphire. I forgot to write part 2, but this is part 2. We'll add that. We'll edit it later. It's a shame because part 1, the recording came out a little choppy, and that's because we had a class here the night before and we moved the whole system, and the plug was plugged in but wasn't plugged in all the way. So, but nevertheless, this is part 2. So we're going to start and continue, and I hope that from the continuing, it will be meaningful and significant for anybody that's listening, although maybe you didn't listen to part 1 due to its choppiness. Okay, this is a discourse on last week's Torah portion, Parshas Mishpatim, which actually was said on the week of the blessing of the month of Adar. So it's connected to the month of Adar, that it was said on the week of the month of Adar. It was said in the year 1959 by the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And it talks about the verse that says that they saw the God of Israel. By the giving of the Torah, they saw the God of Israel, and beneath his leg they saw an image of bricks of sapphire, and it also was as clear as a clear blue sky, a cloudless sky. And he brought in the beginning of the discourse that there's two interpretations. One interpretation is that that's referring to two different times, meaning these were all prophetic visions that was depicting different times of the condition of the world, the condition of the Jewish people, and consequently, the way God was, portraying himself to us. When there was suffering, during the time of suffering, and the suffering of the Egyptian exile was primarily with bricks, so then those bricks showed up under God's legs to show that God is with us in our troubles. He's there. He's together with us on the in the labor camps. God was with the Jewish people. That's why the bricks are there. And then when it says a clear sky, clear blue sky, represents clear blue sky means a time of joy and happiness. That was at the time of the redemption. And what did they do with the bricks? It's very interesting words in the Midrash. They put the bricks where the bricks belong. In other words, they removed the bricks. It's almost like they changed the set on a film. You know, you have different sets. So the first image was a set that depicted exile, and the second image was a set that depicted the redemption, the time of the good days. But then he brought another opinion, and that was the opinion of the Targum Yonasan, where the Targum Yonasan says, no, it was one image, that the bricks of sapphire were shining, they themselves were shining like the bright blue sky. Targum Yonasan says that the bricks of sapphire weren't just a brick, but there was a brick with a little baby that a mother miscarried her baby, and the baby got stuck in the cement, and the cement turned into a brick, and that brick was placed in front of God, and eventually it starts shining like the brightest light in the world. As I mentioned on already last week, and as I mentioned on other times, that this is very, very apropos this week when we've seen the babies who got stuck, so to speak, in the cement of Gaza, and I'm sure they're shining with a brilliant, brilliant light that we don't even understand. Okay, so, but not to get this month of Adar, we have to focus on joy, on happiness. So, but what we see in the second interpretation is that the work of the Jewish people with the bricks is that itself evolves into this bright blue sky. So we need to understand what is the difference between these two opinions, whether these were two separate visions, two separate sets, referring to a depiction of two different times where one doesn't have to do with the other, or that they're both unified as one. That's what we needed to understand. He also asked the question that what's the difference of the stone of sapphire and the brick of sapphire? Why is it that in Ezekiel, it mentions that beneath God's ksiv kamare even sapir demus kisei, that the demus of the kisei of the throne is like the image of the stone of sapphire, but there it mentions stone. It doesn't mention bricks. So, but over here it's bricks. What's the difference between the bricks and the stones? It seems like both are there in the divine throne, in God's throne. What's the difference between the two? Now there is one interpretation he brings from the Jerusalem Talmud, where the Jerusalem Talmud says that the second description of a stone, sapphire stone, is related to a vision that happened during the Babylonian exile. Now, the Babylonian exile, in certain ways, was worse than the Egyptian exile, because the Babylonian exile was also a spiritual torment. It was a darkness that was directed to them spiritually as well, as opposed to the Egyptian exile, which was mainly tormenting their bodies. So for that reason, a stone is harder than a brick. So it was indicating that the exile was worse, was stronger. It was more of a, it's like the hostages when they're talking about their time in Gaza. There's the physical torture that we were in, the hunger, the stuff, but they speak a lot about mental torture. All right, so you see that the mental torture can be a lot worse than the physical torture. So the Babylonian exile, but according to that comes out that the stone, the sapphire stone, is lower than the sapphire brick. However, in other places, he mentioned that stone, since a stone is made by God, and bricks are man-made stones, so bricks are of a lower nature or a lower stature than the stones. Stones are higher than the bricks. And here it seems to apply the opposite, that the brick is higher than the stone. So to resolve all of these ideas, he began by sharing a concept regarding the exile in Egypt, is that Moshe, and he brings a very powerful mystical concept. It has to do with the fact of revelation that is God revealed to Moses, but we didn't know about this until the Kabbalist, the Ari, brings this to our attention. And basically, it's when Moshe charged God for the suffering of the Jewish people of Egypt that seemed to be utterly senseless and completely undeserving. So God answers Moshe, no, this is not even coming from it's not even a punishment. It's not coming from anywhere. It's actually my attribute of compassion. It's just you don't know the whole story. You don't know the whole history of these people. The people, all the Jewish souls that were in Egypt, all these people were reincarnation of the generation that built the Tower of Babylon. And because they sinned with bricks, because it says by the Tower of Babylon that the people didn't have any stones, they were in a valley, in a very wide valley where the mountains were far off. I mean, it's a closed valley is not a problem. You go to the mountains. But if it's a very, very wide area and the mountains are far, they couldn't bring stones. Instead, so they had to forge and make their own stones. That's why they made bricks. And they built this big tower in order to fight God. So God but he explains from the Ari that these were very, very high souls. I guess not every soul decides that it's going to fight God. You have to be like a really high soul to have such a thought. Like, even to think that you can do that. So they must have been powerful souls to have the chutzpah, to have that brazenness, to think that they can fight God. They can go up to heaven. So they must have been souls who felt they can go up to heaven. So they were very lofty souls. It's just that they messed up, whatever their intentions were with making this big tower. And God says, I want to give them a second chance to rectify. So that's why he brought them back into this world. And they were all those reincarnated souls who were in Egypt, who were working in the labor camps to do all that hard work. And that's why precisely they works with the brick and the mortar, because that was a tikkun for the other. In other words, they had to be placed again on a construction site so that they can do a tikkun for their first construction, which was a very negative one. So this is what he brings from the Ari. But he asks the question, if that's the case, the main tikkun should have been related to the fact that they were going to wage war against God. That should have been the tikkun in doing a tikkun for that. Instead, there is a very big emphasis on the idea that they used bricks instead of stones. In other words, when the Midrash depicts and says, not when the Arizal brings the idea that God said, I'm upset at you, that I'm doing this because of kindness, because the people sinned. So the Arizal specifically mentions, what was the sin? That they said, let us use bricks instead of stones. As if that itself, in it of itself, is some kind of a blemish. It's some kind of a of something that needs rectification. And that's the reason why precisely they were working with the bricks, to fix the brick element. So this is the question that he's asking. That seems to be a very, very side and insignificant detail, minor detail. I mean, if they would have built a building made out of stones to fight God, would it be any better? It's the same thing. Whatever material it was, what's the difference? Don't make a deal about the material. That wasn't the issue over here. But it seems like, that itself was part of the problem. So in order to understand this, he begins in chapter 3. This is all what we learned last week. He brings what it says. The Alter Rebbe says in Torah Or that there's a difference between stones and bricks. The main difference is that stones are God-made stones, obviously, God-made, and bricks are imitation stones that human makes. So to understand what this means, we need a better understanding of what the concept of stones are. So just like there are physical stones, there is also psychological stones, or more spiritual stones. The more spiritual stones are the building blocks with which God constructs the universe. How does God construct the universe? God constructs the universe with, God creates all of existence with language. And language is built on letters. Letters are stones. So in Sefer Yetzirah it says, when you have, for instance, two letters create two homes. You can already have two homes, like in a sense, two buildings from two letters. You're beginning to construct civilization, or you're beginning to construct a city. Why? So he gives an example of the two letters. Two letters are the word Aleph, Bet. Let's start with the easiest letters, the first two, Aleph and Beis. When you put an Aleph and a Beis together, you get the word. There's a word there. What's the word? The word is Av, which means father, which is the opposite of now. We're now in the month of Adar, so let's make a tikkun in the Av, in the month of Av, which it says when the month of Av you decrease the joy. The month of Adar, you increase the joy. So by just learning about the word Av right now, we can focus the energy of the mimer that we're learning to bring all healing to the month of Av. The Rebbe says the reason, I'm just saying a side note that doesn't say in the discourse, but the Rebbe says that in this week's Tvar Malchus, beautiful idea. He says, why would you say that just like the month of Av, how do you know that you're supposed to increase joy in the month of Adar? Because the sages say, just like in the month of Av, we diminish the joy, so too in the month of Adar, we increase the joy. So the Rebbe says, why can't we just talk about the month of Adar? Why do we have to talk about the month of Av? Doesn't that, in a sense, dampen the joy? Because when you're telling someone to be happy, why would you tell them, remember a few months ago when you were deeply depressed? Now you should be happy. Why would you bring that up? Let's not talk about the depression. That person, oh, you know what? I was depressed. I'm feeling a little tinge of that still now. Why would you bring that up? So the Rebbe says, no. Because ultimate joy is when you have joy because of good things, but also when you can rectify the negative moments and take those negative moments and retroactively redeem them. Turn over the darkness itself into light. And when you turn over the darkness itself into light, you have a much brighter light. So the point of connecting the two is that the month of Adar should fix the month of Av. That's why the sages make the kashem. The whole point is that the month of Adar should give the month of Av a tow. The month of Adar is the tow truck of joy, and should take the car that has a flat tire in the month of Av and give it a tow and tow it into the dance floor of Adar. To move the deadness of Av into the joy of Adar. And that means in each and every one of us, if we can find anything that's dead inside of us and focus the joy onto that dead spot, to resurrect it, to bring joy into everything. And that's our avoda now in the month of Adar. L'chaim, everyone. So I'm happy because the example that he gave is from the word of, although on the surface level there's no intention of talking about the month of Av, but still, this is what we're learning about. Aleph and Beis spell of. So, in regarding to what we're learning, however, Aleph and Beis means father. Now, what does that mean? That means that the letters themselves, as he refers to it, they are vessels. They are containers. That's what stones are. They're like just objects. But when you put stones next to each other, you build a wall, and you build 4 walls or 3 walls, you create a space. And in that space, someone can live in that space. It becomes inhabitable for someone to live. And the same is with the world of language. When you take a few letters and you put them together, you create a certain construct in which an idea can be revealed. So the idea is called the energy, and the letters are called the vessels. So with the words Aleph and Beis, he says, you can create 2 different homes for 2 different residents to live there. If you put the Aleph first and then the Bet, Aleph Beis, then the concept of father can live inside those 2 letters. If you put the Bet before the Aleph, then it's a whole different concept. What's the concept? It means it represents the word bo, which is a parsha in the Torah. Bo el para, right? Bo, come. So it means a whole different idea, come. So what do you see from here? That words and letters, they're like stones, and depending on how you put these letters out, that's how you create a container and a vessel to facilitate a concept. Okay. Now, a little deeper we learned, if you remember, I'm just refreshing everybody's memory of what we learned last week, that this idea of letters, which the letters are the concept of vessels, versus, and the vessels, when there are vessels, there is something that goes into the vessels. There's energy and there's vessels. This concept exists on all levels, even into the divine, of course. In the divine attributes, there are the vessels of the attributes, the kalim of the sphirot, and there is the oiros of the spheres, the lights that are in the spheres. And in God's names, even in Hashem's names, because everything starts with God's names, there is a name of God that produces the vessels, and there is a name of God associated with the energies, with the lights, with the emanations of God. What is the name of God associated with containers and vessels? And the name of God associated with energy. So we learned last week The name of God associated with vessels is the name of 52. Shem Ban 52. As we mentioned last week, it's the tetragrammaton. It's Yud K Vav K. However, with the inside letters, when you fill them with haze, you fill the inside of the letter with a hay. That means the Yud we can fill with a hay. Yud is Yud Vav Dalit, but the other letters are hey hey, and the last letter is also hey hey, and the Vav doesn't have a hey, but it also doesn't have an aleph. It's just Vav Vav. So if you do the gematria of that, you get 52, called Shem Ban. Through that name, God creates the stones. God creates, through that name of God, God creates the vessels, the letters which are the vessels. And now there's another name of God. Same name, tetragrammaton, but spelled differently. The hidden letters are spelled differently. When it's filled with the letter Aleph, Aleph stands the first letter for the word Or, light. So when you fill the Yud K Vav K with olives, the numeric value of the Yud K Vav K is reduced from 52 to 45. So now, and that name of God is the name of the lights, the energy, not the vessels. Which is exciting. Tonight, we finished the Rambam. I just came from an event that was commemorating the global study of Rambam. The Rebbe, the Lubavitch Rebbe Institute, we should study Maimonides every day. And there's a system of 3 chapters a day. You finish it yearly. So literally just an hour ago, I was at this event. And they announced that this was the 44th cycle, which means we're starting the 45th cycle, which is exciting because I was trying to think 45. It's the energy. It's almost like everything we did till now was only preparing the vessels. And now finally the light, the true manifestation of Yud K Vav K that comes to the world through the learning of Rambam. God's light to fill it all. Now we're ready for that. So, which teaches us that when we learn it this time, we should learn it not just with, because I was last cycle of, I'm going to do a confession now. I don't know, I'm just a little tired, so I'm just talking off. So I'm confessing publicly in front of everybody. Last cycle of Rambam, I realized was very poor for me. I studied it, but I read it without much concentration. I did it every night before I went to sleep, halfway in bed, just reading it. There was absolutely no energy and I'm not saying every day, but it was like I only did it because I could not do it. But I didn't do it with applying myself in any way. It basically was only words. It was only letters. There was no life in it. So, but now that I'm seeing that time is now the 45th cycle, so I better put some neshama. What's neshama? 45. Got to put some soul into it to learn it with life, with joy. And maybe it's because we're starting the new cycle in the month of Adar, which the month of Adar is the month of energy, of life. Not just contains the difference between joy and non-joy. When you're not joyous, you just do things because you're doing them. You're doing them with vessels without light. Joy is the real oil, is the real light that fills the vessels and drives a powerful energy through the vessels. That's the energy of the the neshama. So now we're learning Rambam for the 45th time, starting actually tomorrow, Friday, is going to be the last 3 chapters. And Shabbos is when we're going to start on the first day of the month of Adar. Shabbos is really the first day of the month of Adar. We're going to begin the 45th cycle of Rambam. And it's particularly connected to Rambam because the Rambam's name was Moshe. And we know that the original Moshe said about himself, V'anachnu ma. Moshe was the channel of lights. We discussed last week, Moshe didn't have words. There's so many things we discussed last week. We said Moshe was poor of words. Moshe didn't have vessels because Moshe came from the world of lights. He came from the Yud K Vav K, equaling 45, his soul root, and therefore he didn't have words. Because the world of words comes from the name of God, the name of 52, not the name of, from the vessels, not from the lights. So again, I'm going off track over here. I'm just excited that we're starting the 45th learning of Rambam. And the Rambam is Moshe. And particularly we connect Moshe Rabbeinu to the Rambam because we say from Moshe to Moshe, there was none like Moshe. That was a famous statement that was said regarding Maimonides. That from the original Moses, until the Moses ben Maimon, the Rambam, there was no other Moshe who had that status so high. So obviously that means that Rambam had the same connection to Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama, to Moses' soul, which was the energy of 45. So to start learning the 45th round of Rambam is very powerful. But as I mentioned earlier, this time around, it's not okay to just mumble words. This time around, we got to learn it with neshama. We got to learn it with life. We got to learn it with energy. Back to what we're learning in the Maimer. Now, that was just a commercial. I'm sorry. It was a confession and a commercial. Now we're back to the Maimer. So the Maimer says there are these two names of God. One is the Yud Kei Vav Kei that equals 45, which is the source of all lights, of the oiros that go into the spheroids, into the attributes. And the other Yud Kei Vav Kei tetragrammaton equals 52, which 52 is gematria Ban, and Ban is the source of the vessels. So, however, that's in general. But then we learned a cooler idea. This is so great. We learned a cooler idea. What was the cooler idea? We learned that in each one contains both. The world of the name of God, that's Yud Kei Vav Kei, that equals Ma, that's 45, has within it a hidden potential for vessels as well. And that's called the Ban from Ma. In general, it's the energy of Ma. But it has within it also hidden letters. Even in the Ma, there's also hidden letters. Even the world of energy has within it embedded subtle letters. And on the other hand, even the vessels, which is the Shem Ban, which produces the Kalim, the vessels, have in it the energy. There's oil in the vessels, and there is Kalim in the oil. That's the idea we're learning. So last week, I made up a mashal, but I really like it. And I hope that one day I'll find in Chassidus that I was right. And I don't know if my students remember the mashal I gave last week for this. I said that when you sing a niggin, music is pure energy. But even in music, there are musical notes. But you don't hear, when you're speaking words, you're giving a concept. When someone is giving off an idea, there as well, the better the speaker, the clearer the message is, the less you hear the words, the more you hear the content, the idea. When a speech sounds very wordy, like they make fun of somebody in this world, they call her that she always gives word salads. All you hear is a bunch of words and you don't hear any content. The more content there is to words, you don't hear the words, you hear the content, you hear the idea. But still, words make up very much the idea of a speech. Words make up very much. But in a song, especially a song without words, a nigun, you don't hear the words. There's no words there. But there are musical notes. But I feel so bad for a person who is a musical composer, who hears a song and sees all kinds of musical notes the whole time and cannot tune into the song because they're getting stuck on the musical notes. That must be, I guess, someone who job is to write music. They can never experience the energy of a song because when they're hearing the song, I found myself, for instance, it bothered me for years. When they show Rebbe videos, they show subtitles on the bottom. And I used to watch a Matzah Shabbos, they would show them in Levi Yitzchak always, the Living Torah. So I would sit and watch, and I would want to concentrate on what the Rebbe is saying, but I would get caught in the subtitles, and I would, instead of listening, I understand Yiddish, I understand the Rebbe talking, but instead of understanding in Yiddish, I read along the bottom subtitles. And it annoyed me because it was like distracting me from like just hearing the pure words and the holy ideas that are coming from the thing, and instead focusing on the letters. See, the letters need to really dissolve into the letters need to be very unassuming. They need to allow the energy to come through. The better the letters are, if they're not drawing attention to themselves, the words themselves. It's the energy in it. So an example of letters that are inside the oir would be musical notes. They're there, but no one notices them. But in words, there is much more words. So that would be an example, perhaps, of the ban of the ma. And what's the example of the ma in the ban? The ma in the ban. I have to say that and what does that mean? That means that even in the words of words, there is also an energy. So in Chassidus it says, we learned about it when we learned Ayin Beis on the Lakus podcast a while ago, we learned that in addition to the Or, to the lights that go into the Kalim, in Atzilut, there is the body, that's the vessels, and there is the Oirais, the lights. In addition to that, the Kalim themselves have their own words of God that creates them. In addition to the light that goes into the vessels after the vessels are made, there is energy in the vessels themselves. For example, let me put it this way. If you have a home, so in the home, the people that live in the house, there is that's the energy of the house, of the inhabitants, the activities that are going on in the home, the festivities that are going on in the home, the Shabbos dinners that are going on in the home. That's the life of the house. But then there is life in the walls itself, in the stones themselves, because everything has life. That would be the example of the oir that's in the ma, that's in the ban. That's in the ban itself. Now, more specifically, he said, more specifically, again, so we're saying there's oiros, there's kalim. There's two names. There's ma and there's ban. Then he says, and in each one, there is the ban of the ma, and there is the ma of the ban. The energy in the letters, and the letters in the energy. Remember, last week we gave another very beautiful idea. That we know that Moshe and Aaron together make up a team. Moshe and his brother Aaron. And what does Moshe say about Aaron? Va'anachnu ma. We are both ma. Him and his brother were both the level of ma, total nullification to God, and the level of pure energy. Pure energy. Yet, the difference between Moshe and Aaron, they were two. Moshe is the ma of the ma, the energy of the energy, and Aaron is the ban of the ma. That's why Hashem says to Moshe, when he says, I can't talk, he says, Aaron will be your words, he'll be your mouthpiece. But hold it, if Aaron is the mouthpiece, then Aaron is ban, he's not ma. No. Aaron is part of ma, he's the ban of the ma. He's the stones of the ma. And as last week made the connection, this again, my own connection, I was thinking, that maybe that's the reason why Aaron is the one who wears the stones. Next week's Torah portion. Starts already this week's, Va'avnei shoam, va'avnei meluyim, lo ephod v'lo choshen. Stones go to Aaron, not to Moshe. Moshe is not, we don't find anywhere that Moshe, besides that he receives the luchos even from God, engraved in stone, but over there, it's almost like the stone is not even important. It's the words of God that were on the luchos. But Aaron is the one who carries the stones, because he relates to ban that's in the ma. Okay, now he goes and he continues. Since ma represents energies and ban represents vessels, so we can understand that if you take all of existence and you label it, the creation is more ban and the divine is more ma. That's why Atzilus, which is a pure divine world, is called ma. The general energy of Atzilus is ma. Even though there's vessels there and there are containers there, but those containers are hardly felt. All you feel is infinity, boundless. consciousness of God. The energy is completely dominating the world of Atzilus. We know that Atzilus, which sphera dominates the whole world of Atzilus? Chachma. And Chachma is called Koach Ma, the power of Ma. But Bina, from Bina and downward, which manifests in the three lower worlds, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya. In these three worlds, these are the worlds of vessels, of containers. They are the worlds of Ban. And it corresponds because what element of God relates to the world of Bria? Bina. Bina, think about it. Bina means understanding. And in a human experience, where does the word start? Where do you start hearing words? That's when you get to your Bina. When you have a flash of Chachma, when you have an idea flashing in your mind, you don't hear words. What do you hear? You hear just a concept. The initial epiphany, you see a light goes on in your brain. You don't hear words. The words happen when the idea, you start chewing it in your Bina part of your brain. When it goes into the left side of the brain, that's where the words take place. So that makes sense because Bina is the soul of the world of Bria is Bina. And then the soul of the world of Yetzira are the emotions, Ze'eranpin, and the souls of Asiya, our physical world, is Malchut. And Malchut is for sure words, for sure Ban. Okay? So this is where we have the structure over here. That's what we learned last week. Now, what's the essential difference between Ma and Ban? What's the essence of it? What's the core difference between vessels and light? It's a very important idea. The core difference between vessels and light is that light is bittul. Light reflects the source. Light doesn't have beingness. That's why it's called Ma. Ma means what? So a light doesn't have substance. And therefore the nature of light itself is always to just dissolve in its source. That's light. Light is me'ein hamor, and it reflects the source, it represents the source, it doesn't want to be, it doesn't have a beingness to it. Vessels is yesh, something. Metzius. The concept of a vessel is presence, being. It's the limitations of something that give it a presence, a defined existence, a somethingness. And that's why it's interesting, we said earlier, that even in Ma, there needs to be the Ban of the Ma. And we said earlier, the Aaron of the motion. You know why? Because in order for light to be light, it has to reveal itself. What makes the light to reveal itself is not the light of the light, but the vessels of the light. The essence of the light, which is the soul of the light, would never reveal itself. What would it do? It would hide inside its source. That's the nature of light. It's so buttle, it's so nullified to its source. It needs the vessels of the light for it to emerge outside of itself. To move out of the source. The oisiyos that are hidden in the light, and that's why we're going to see in a moment that the letters, where there is kalim, it draws the light. Without kalim, the light gets hidden back in its source. Like, for example, fire, which fire is an example for light, for energy. Fire will only burn if you create a vessel. You have a wick, you have oil, you have that's where. The moment there is no vessel, the fire disappears. The vessel is the ban, the somethingness. There's something here. That's when it can catch on. Because light on itself dissolves. Ban, the very nature of ban is yeshes, somethingness. Ban is gematria behema, and ma is gematria adam. Adam means man. Ma is the numeric value of adam, man. And the behema is 52. What's the difference between adam and behema? So you have to look in Torah. What does Torah say is the main primary difference between a human and an animal? A human seeks to dissolve itself. Ruach ha'adam ha'oila l'mayla. The spirit of man, spirit of ma, Oila Lamaila goes upward, goes into its source. Ruach HaBehema, the spirit of animal, gravitates downwards into beingness, into presence, into existence. Really a human, the true nature of the human, whoever is truly human, the true nature of the human is to disappear unless we're looking at him. Unless we're someone anchoring him down, he would disappear back. The true nature of the nation is bittul, is chachma, is nullification. Moshe Rabbeinu wouldn't be here unless, he's like commanded every minute to be here, to be on a shlichus. That's the idea. We're holding Sif Dalet. This is where we were holding from last week. This was a little review. Also, I just want to connect it back to the bricks and the stone. The stones now, which are God-made stones, represent the ban of the ma. That's called stone. It's the stones that are the ban of the ban are called bricks. Because in general, ban is the creation, is a limitation, is the creation. The stones, and what's bricks? Stones that the creations make. We might say something like this. In concept, I'm gonna give it a little bit of a broader. In concept, God's words are stones. Humans' words are bricks. God created us in his image that the human can speak, just like God uses language, we use language. God's language are stones, human language are bricks. Or, even when humans talk, but when humans are talking holy words, words of Torah, you're really saying God's words. That's stones. When humans are talking creation stuff, human stuff, when our language is used for human business, creation business, not godly business, that's bricks, imitation stones. And that's the idea of it being ban shebeban, the ban of the ban, versus the ban of the ma, which is divine stones. Okay, we're going to get more clearer in that as we learn, or we're going to get hopefully some clarity as we learn. To understand this in a deeper manner. This is in Siv Dalid, in the Maimer Vayiru Asalekei Yisrael, Tafshin Yotes, which is 57:19. To understand this deeper, in a Hefresh ben Atzilus leBiyah. What's the difference between the world of Atzilus and the world of Biyah? Biyah is an acronym for the three lower worlds: Bria, Yetzir, and Asil. Who? Shatzilus u'metzad b'chines ha'chachma. Atzilus is a product, if you might say, of chachma. Chachma is very much expressed in the world of Atzilus. Biyah, and Biyah comes into existence, and mitzat sfires habina is a product of the attribute of bina. V'asfira shalamata himene, or the sfirot, as we mentioned this earlier, or the spheros that are lower than bina. Sfiras hachachma, the attribute of chachma, in yanoi b'chinas ha'or. The inyan of chachma is light. Ki yadua, as it is known. Shas cholas hakelim hu mahabina. That the vessels really start in bina. In Sfiras HaChachma, there's really no vessels. It's just pure energy, like we see in our own head. When we have a first initial flash of an idea, you don't feel words there. There's no words. It's just an idea. It's just a concept. It's just a pure light. The real kelim begin in bina. So what we're saying is that really the entire Atzilus is all a continuation of Chachma, where you hardly feel the vessels. Although in Atzilus there is Bina, and there is Ze'er Anpin, the 6 emotions, and there is Malchus. Yes, that's true. And there is even Hacholos in Atzilus, chambers in Atzilus. But in all of them, you don't really notice them. They're hidden. They're hidden inside a world of energy, a world of pure light. Because the dominating feature of the entire world of Atzilus is Chachma, which Chachma is without Keli. And that's why Atzilus is totally one with God. Because light is batal to its source. And when something is batal, it's one with its source. Bittul makes you one. The lack of bittul separates you, makes you a something, makes you a somebody other than God. Bittul is the secret of unity. A tzaddik is one with Hashem because he's batal to Hashem. And in Chachma is the concept of lights. And in light itself, he's going to say there's 3 levels of light. In the light itself, each one a deeper level of bittul. First, there is the light, even when the light goes into vessels. The light is still light. It's still batal. How do you know the light, even when it goes into the vessel, is still batal to the source? Because the moment you shut down the source, there is no light. The light cannot be present. The light can never tell its own story. The light is only telling you about the source. That's why it annoys all the non-Chabadniks when a Chabadnik comes into the room, because all he does is he talks about the Rebbe. The Rebbe said, and the Rebbe said. And if you're not a Lubavitcher, you get so nervous with this guy. What's with this guy? Doesn't stop. Say something. Anything's the Rebbe. The Chassid is a light. So since he's a light of the Rebbe. He has bittul. He does no metzias. So he can't say 2 words without mentioning the Rebbe, because it's all the Rebbe. That light is a light doesn't exist. If there's no ma'ar, there is no light. It's like the second you shut the light source, the light disappears. So you see, even the light that's in the vessel, even when it's in a vessel, it still acknowledges the source, doesn't have any other existence other than the source. But then there is the light before it goes into a vessel. Just the light is emerging. Then it's even more batal. But the deepest bittul of the light is when the light is still in the luminary itself, like the ray of the sun while it's in the sun. Then it doesn't even have it. You don't even see light at all. All you see is the sun. You don't even see the light. At least when the light comes out, you can see the light. It's just that the light never separates from its source. But the light, when it's in the source, it doesn't even exist at all. Its entire existence is the source. As he says, and in the light itself, there is the light when the light is in a revealed state. And there is the light as it is included in the essence. And it's understood that the light, the light when it is in a revealed state, you can't compare it at all, like the light when it's in the essence, because it's when it is in the essence 2 things. It's so much brighter than when it goes out of its source. It's like a very weird thing, 2 opposites. On the one hand, as bright as the light is when it goes out of its source, it's so much brighter when it's in the source, which means in the very place where it's producing the light. That's when the light is in its most potent state. But yet, precisely there, it is so overshadowed by the source that you don't even notice. The very bright light is not noticed at all because all you notice is source. It's at its brightest, but it's also at its most it's in its most self-effacement. Even though shegam kashero, but here in the Maimer, he's not talking so much about the fact that the light is brighter in the source. What he's really emphasizing is the concept that the light in the source is much more bittul than when it comes out. The moment it goes out of its source, it already drops in the quality of light, that the quality of light means that it is nullified to the source. Even though when the light is revealed, it is in a state, we turn over the page Kuf Chav, it is in a state of dveikus, of attachment to the source. Like we see Ba'er HaShemesh, the light of the sun. When you have clouds that get in the way between the sun and any given space, what happens to the sunlight? It disappears. The light becomes not. Yeseidim is more than that. It's not just that it's always attached. It's sensed. You can sense in the light itself that its existence is from. In other words, you can sense in the sunlight that what is it? It's the sun. And as the sunlight, the rays of the sun tell you that it's sunny today. When you feel the sun's rays and it's hot, you right away become aware of the sun. It doesn't in any way try to portray, the rays don't in any way draw attention to them being something, a ray. Think about it. You say you need sunglasses. You don't say you need ray glasses. The sun is not bothering you. The rays of the sun are bothering you. So why don't we call it ray glasses? Why when you get a burn, you don't say, I got a ray burn. Someone over here, his name is Ray. You say you got a sunburn because the rays are the sun. That's what it is. It doesn't in any way have a something to itself. That's why it's in a state of bittul. Because it senses its source. It senses that its entire existence is its source. And think about Moshe that way. Moshe was the most humble person because he wasn't him. He was a ray. Moshe is a ray of God. That's what he is. And because he is a ray of God, Moses, he doesn't convey himself. He conveys God. And that's why he says to the people, if you're arguing with me, you're arguing with God. Because he has no identity. However, notwithstanding the fact that a ray of the sun knows the sun and is surrendered to, feels the sun and is surrendered to the sun and has no existence other than the sun, you can't compare it at all like the light when the light is still in the sun. And because the rays, the idea of oir, of light, is that light is nullified to the source. Because of that, if there isn't an opposite force, what's the opposite force? The opposite force is kalim. Vessels is the opposite of light. It's almost like vessels have weight. Vessels weigh down. They go into themselves. They don't go into their source. They go into themselves. So if not for in other words, it's almost like you have to put weights on the light to pull the light down. The light gets so sucked into its source that unless you put heavy weights down, imagine taking 5 pounds and 10-pound weights and putting it on the light so that the light can come out. Because you need something that has metzius, the opposite of bittul. Yeshus. What's the opposite of bittul? Yesh, somethingness. So God created the concept of vessels, which vessels are the opposite idea of energy. The vessels know themselves and not their source. And we learned it in Ayin Beis. We had a whole long discussion how they're created through a system of a collision and a separation and an anonymousness from their source. It's the whole point of vessels is that the source does not reveal itself to them. So they're created as if they're independent, separate entities. And that's what's needed to draw the light out of its seclusion in its source. If the light would have its way, it would just be melted in the sun completely. The lights of any energy. It needs the opposite force, which is the idea of mitzios and somethingness, to pull the light out of its humility. In order for light to be revealed, you need the vessels. The vessels affect the light in three ways. One idea is first of all, the vessels give the light existence, because without the vessels, the light is so much the source that the light doesn't even have an existence. All there is a source. Go into the sun and all you have is the sun. You don't have rays of the sun. The rays are there, but the rays are just the sun. There's nothing else there but the sun. So in order for it to become something, it needs vessels. Vessels are something. Ubedugmas ha'esh, and then like the nature of fire, shetivay la'alois l'mayla, just like fire whose nature is to go up. Ubechdei shetiyah b'mitzius, in order for the fire even to be in existence, tzarech liyos davar hanifrad. Let's understand something. Fire is an energy of something. So where is the fire? Where is of what? Of the source of fire, whatever that is. So where is the fire before you create? It's somewhere in the atmosphere. It exists. This energy exists, but it doesn't exist because it is so elusive. It is so hidden. It is so tucked into its source that it literally doesn't exist. What gives it existence and presence? You have to create a vessel. You have to create a keli. And the keli are the weights that pull the fire down. And that is something separated. Tzarechli is davar an nifrad. You need something separated. Shabai nechas ha'esh, in which the fire would hold on to. The same is also in the light. In order for light to come into existence, it's through the vessels, which them hold on to this. The whole Parshas Truma. Think about it. Whole Parshas Truma is to create the vessels that will make God real in the world, or else Hashem's light dissolves into the infinite, infinitely above. But to make God a concrete reality in this world, we need the vessels down here, and that's what pulls the lights down, pulled Hashem down. And Hashem would communicate to Moshe from a certain building. He was there. Literally, the cloud was there. You could see God's presence in the Mishkan. What was the point of making the Mishkan? Making the vessels. The appropriate vessels that can pull Hashem, pull God from his non-beingness into beingness. The Inyan HaBeis, and the second idea of the vessels, Bepu'ulas HaKelim, and the effects of the vessels, Shehem Mamshichem Esa'or Mimakoiroi. They draw down the light from its source. So what does that mean? I was having a hard time last week to understand what is number two more than number one. Number one seems to be just to make the light be light, it already needs vessels. The light before the vessels is not even light. All there is ma'or. All there is the source of light, not light. The luminary without the light. So to make the light, even inside the source, needs vessels already. Seems like the vessels begin affecting the light even when the light is inside the very manufacturing plant of the light, which is the luminary. So to make the light be light, it already needs vessels. But the second thing is to draw that light out of the source. That seems what it means, but I'm not exact. So what would mean the existence of the light in the source? What would be accomplishment A? If the vessels would not do accomplishment B, what would you have in accomplishment A? It's already accomplishing. It's already producing the light. The light in the source is produced not by the light, it's produced by the vessels. I guess that the light should separate from its source, even if it's not going out of its source, but that it should separate, that it should be light, or else it would just be just source. Like the example of the fire. You're creating the entity of the fire. It's not just that you're drawing the fire down, you're creating the entity of fire by having a vessel, by striking the match, by having something to hold it onto. Again, it's very subtle what he's saying, and I didn't understand it so well, but maybe something. As it is known in the vessels above, they don't just facilitate the lights. It says the vessels in Atzilut, they don't just facilitate. Once there are lights, this is a place where the light can land or be contained. It's not just that. When there are vessels, it draws the light. If there are no vessels, the light doesn't even come out. You know where we have that? The perfect example for that was by Elisha's blessing to the Shinamis. The Shinamis was that woman who came to Elisha. She was in terrible debt. And Elisha, we read it in the Haftorah of Parshas Vayera, he tells her, go out and borrow vessels. She said, what do you have in your house? He said, all I have is a small little jug of oil. He says, go borrow vessels from your neighbors. And don't diminish. Get as many containers as you can. As many barrels as you can. And then take it and start pouring. And the miracle was, the oil just continued and continued and continued and continued. And it never stopped. When did it stop? She said these words. She told her children. The children were running, bringing containers after containers. She told her children, bring another keli, and they said there isn't anymore. There's no more oil. So what do you see? It wasn't, okay, so the oil should continue, it should spill on the floor. No, if there's no vessel, the oil doesn't come. It's not just that there's no vessel to contain it. It doesn't exist. In order to draw it down, the light should come down. The vessel is a magnet to the light, pulls the light. Like I mentioned to Ariel, I said if she wouldn't come, there would be all these people would be deprived from shiurim. Oops, I'm sorry, I said your name. Oh, now you're in trouble. I'm going to erase it. There has to be students. Without students, there is no class. Understand? Teacher can't teach without. The oil will only flow if there is a student. That's just the way it is. The vessels pull the thing. They draw the light from its source. What's the third element of the vessels on the light? Through the vessels, the light now reveals itself below. So what does that mean? Isn't that the second thing, that the light emerges? No, it's a third thing. Let's think about the Shinamis's vessels. One thing is, through the fact that there was a vessel, it caused the oil to continue flowing. So it brought the light down. It brought the oil. In this case, the oil is the oil. It brought the oil down into the vessels. But the next thing is, from the Shinamis's jug, that's the super jug, you can't give that to everybody. She was able to sell the oil and give it this because she had small containers, and then she took her larger containers and she put them into small little things, and she sold each one of them. Everybody wanted to get the special miracle oil. But that's because it was already then later held in a container, and then it can be distributed to people that were not worthy or were not in the level to be there at the miracle. The concept is, through the vessels of Atzilus, for example, the lights of Atzilus can come down into creation. The light itself, without a vessel, would never be able to be transported into Atzilus. I'm sorry, into Bria, into creation. The vessels diminish it, define it, limit it, thicken it, make it transmittable to make it reachable to the next level. The main tachlis, the main point of drawing the light, is that it should be revealed down here. It should be revealed in the world, lamata, below. But lights on its own, lights without vessels, the world can't handle it. It can't be revealed down here. In order for it to be down there, it has to go through vessels. Through the medium of the vessels, the light is able to come down below. Like, there's no way for a person to transmit an idea unless you put it into words. Through the words, you can then pass the ideas down to a recipient, through the language, through the words. However, he says, so that's the important, incredible significance of the vessels. But he's talking over here in the world of Atzilus. Even the vessels of Atzilus, since they are in the world of Atzilus, even the vessels, we said earlier that vessels are the opposite of bittul. The vessels are something, they're yesh, they're mitzias, they're substance, they're existence. The opposite of light that only knows the source. And that's why they're able to pull, they act as weights, and they can pull the lights down. Number one, they produce the light. Number two, they draw the light out of itself, out of the source. Number three, they're able to now communicate the light downward. Fine. So with that, the vessels have to be a mitzias, they have to be something. They have to be defined. Yet, in the world of Atzilus, because Atzilus is the first world, notwithstanding the fact that there are vessels over there that do a job on the light, but the light is still so dominating in the world of Atzilus, in the world of emanation, that it swallows the vessels. That even the vessels become humble. The vessels become impacted by the light, and the vessels become very humble vessels. Which means, contrary to the nature of the vessels to be present and have a self, they get swept away by the humility of the lights, and they too become humble. So that's why God cannot suffice with the vessels of Atzilus. He has to create the next world where the vessels are more present and more substance and those vessels are coarse vessels. When the vessels start getting coarse, sometimes you see in the world, I give a very gewaltig example, that the real lofty Hasidim, they can't have much of an effect on the people. Because they're so humble and they're so quiet. You need to have like a Chassid or Pulvan, a guy who's less sensitive, and precisely because he's less sensitive, he's able to like go out there with pride and with the strength and with the somethingness, and has more of a mitzias, which on the one hand you could look at it as ego, but precisely with that ego he can build, because he's the other guys, but being too humble, you can't move mountains. You have to be so. It's like the Rebbe needs second tier Hasidim also, not just the first humble ones that are so batal and so nullified, because then it doesn't. It's the way it is. God also made it this way. He didn't suffice with the world of Atzilus because everything is back to him. Since they are in the world of Atzilus, they are in the epitome of bittul, and their bittul. And here's a very interesting idea that he's saying. The bittul of the vessels of Atzilus is not because they're getting a lesson in bittul. That they're getting a speech. The speech tells them how Einoid Malvadar, there's nothing but God, and therefore you shouldn't be a vessel and take and project yourself as if you're somebody. You should know that God is the only reality, and therefore you should be humble to God. That would mean that intrinsically they are egotistical. Intrinsically they have a self. It's just that there's a force that influences them and turns them around to be batal, to be nullified. That's not what it is. The vessels of Atzilus have intrinsic bittul because they're in the world of Atzilus. It's not a bittul that comes because someone embittled them. They become bottled, that's their nature. From within themselves, not from an outside force. It's like our soul is bottled to Hashem naturally. Our body intrinsically is not bottled. The soul has to hammer bittul into the body. So he's saying, but the vessels of Atzilus are not like our bodies. The vessels of Atzilus are naturally bottled, organically bottled. It's from the way they were netzal, from their very, very emanation. Which makes the bittul be not an add-on to who they are. You can tell a major difference in someone's humility if they are humble because the humility that they have is an add-on to who they are, or someone who is essentially humble. It's a whole different character. And even though the vessels are called yesh, however, they're called yesh hanetzal. They're called the something that was emanated. That seems to be actually a oxymoron, an inherent contradiction. We're saying that the vessels of Atzilus are a yesh, which means something, but it's the yesh hanetzal. It's the yesh of Atzilus. It's the somethingness of Atzilus, which means it's a something that's not even a creation yet. It's still God. It's in the Ayin Beis Maimer. I remember a few months ago we characterized this like this: it's God becoming something. It's not a creation. It's like he somethingizing himself into somethingness, as opposed to something that really becomes a something. It means it's a yesh hanetzal. It's the something of the emanator. In a mash and a kram b'shem yesh, and therefore, even though it's called yesh, which means something, it's a borrowed term. Chas v'shalom, God forbid and God forbid, to refer to Atzilus, even the vessels of Atzilus, as a something other than God. They're perfectly unified with him. So much so that the vessels of Atzilus have names of God associated with them. They can't be a something. Lefishal yadam. So he says like this: the reason they're called yesh is not because they are something. It's because they affect a creation that's a yesh. Their yeshus, the yesh of Atzilus, the somethingness of the vessels, is not that it is something, but that it produces something. Without the vessels, the light would be so clearly flowing in everything that everything would be light and nothing would be nothing would be anything. There would never be a world of somethingness. Everything would be purely divine lights. Wherever we would look, it would be pure divine energy. There would be no creation. There would be no things and stuff. In order for things and stuff to appear, there needs to be vessels. The vessels produce the thinginess of creation, but not that they themselves are a thing. It's their effect is that there should be. And that's because they have the concept of yesh to them. That's why they can produce yesh. They themselves are still bottled completely. It's part of the ban shebema. What dominates the entire Atzilus is ma, total bittul. It's the ban of the ma. And therefore, the ban of the ma is also ma. Like we said earlier, Aaron was not ban, was not something. Aaron was ma, batal. But he is the something of the as we last week we gave it. It's the words, it's the revelation of nothingness. It's the expression of nothingness. It's that the nothingness is able to vocalize its nothingness. There is a level where the nothing is so nothing that it doesn't even say that it's nothing. There is a level where the nothingness gets a voice to say that I'm nothing. But that is already a vocalization. So the spheroids of Atzilus, the kalim of Atzilus, express Ein Od Milvado, there's nothing but God. Before the vessel, there's nobody even to say that they're nothing. But the vessels of Bria, the containers of Bria, the somethingness of the world of Bria is real something. There, the language is not something it's speaking the humility, it's speaking the nothingness. It's giving expression to the light. The vessels of Atzilus are only giving expression to the light. And what is the light saying? If you were to ask the light would say nothing but him. As he says, Avalehem atzmon, but they themselves, Einom b'bchinas yesh chas v'shalom. They're not, God forbid, in a state of yesh. K'muvin gam mizeh gufa, and it's as it is understood from this itself, shenikram b'shem yesh netzal. They're called yesh, which is something, but they're called yesh netzal. Netzal means emanating. Shaddai netzal, and what does the word netzal mean? In the word netzal, you have the word that's close to God, attached to him, because netzal comes from the word etzlo. Etzlo means next to him, with him. That means these are vessels that are with him, part of him. Etzel v'samuch, close by. The kiven shem etzloi v'samuch, since they are close, and hareim betachlis habitl, since they are so close to the infinite, to God himself, to the Ein Sof, they are in the epitome of nullification. Ukemaimer, so much so that we say, Iyu v'chiyu echad, God and his life forces are one. Iyu v'garmu echad, God and his vessels are one. That he is completely one with those vessels. Shagam ha'kelim, that also the vessels, garmu emchad imchinas iyu. They are totally one with he himself. Umasha mechalkim iyu v'chiyu echad b'fnei atzmoi, v'iyu garmu echad b'fnei atzmoi. And this that we differentiate and say he and his life forces are one, he and his vessels are one, thereby differentiating the life forces and the vessels, which means we are saying that the oneness that he is one with the lights is different than the oneness that he is one with the vessels. Yeah, that's true. Because his oneness with the light is deeper than his oneness with the vessels. That's because the attachment of the vessels cannot compete and can't compare itself to the attachment of the lights. But that is not to say that the vessels are not attached. It's just not on the same level of attachment. But of course, they're also attached. The lights are in a very visible state of dveikus. And the vessels and dveikus bilti nikeres. And the vessels are in a state of dveikus, of attachment to God, but in a type of attachment that's not so noticeable. But definitely, even the vessels and bedveikus are in a state of attachment, ubetachlis habitul, and with the epitome of nullification. And since these vessels are close to him, the samuch le'ein sof, and they're very close to the Ein Sof, to the infinite one, comes out like this. If you are attached to infinity and close to infinity, you yourself are infinite. So comes out the vessels of Atzilus are infinite. They're not finite. Even the vessels of Chesed are infinite Chesed. It's infinite kindness, infinite. Just like God himself is limitless, the vessels are also believable. And that's a proof limitless. And that's a proof that they're not yesh, they're not something. If they're something, if you're really something, then you're other than God. You can't be infinite. Only God is infinite. If the vessels are infinite, means that they are not something. Vahainu. But hold it, aren't the vessels already a concept of limitation? Doesn't Atzilus is a world, if it's a world that has limitation. He says, because the limitation of the world of Atzilus, Einoi Hagbala Mamish, is not what we call real limitation. What it means is that it's a power that will affect limitation outside of it. Not in Atzilus itself is infinite. It will affect limitation outside of it. He's soon going to give a beautiful example for this. Where do we see this in ourselves as well? It affects limitation. But not in Atzilus. In Atzilus, everything that emanates from these vessels, in Atzilus, any energy that's coming through the vessels while it's still in the world of Atzilus is infinite. But when it's going to translate into the next world, in Bria, that's where it affects limitation. Gamzeh v'gamzeh rak bebiyah. This is literally, we learned this in the Elikus podcast, in the Elikus channel a while ago. We were learning this idea a few times, that its limitations are only when it goes out of Atzilus in the three lower worlds. But when it is in Atzilus, it's infinite. Now, what kind of an example can that? Where can we find something that in itself is limitless, but it affects limitation? How Chassidus found this mashal is so beautiful. And the metaphor for this, the power that a human being has to move, the power of movement that we can move, and the power of writing, power to transcribe, script, and to write. In the world of human, and as much as we can say a human has limitless power, when he says be'erech ha'adam means, within the context of human existence, this is called limitless. Why? Because the real power of writing doesn't come from our body. Obviously, just like speech doesn't come from our body, it comes from our soul. So just like I asked the question, how many words can you speak? Well, if you live forever, you can speak without an end words. There's no cut off of how many words and how many letters the soul can produce. The soul can produce. The only reason why there is a certain amount of words that a person speaks during their lifetime is because the soul is attached to a body only for a certain duration of time. But hypothetically, if soul and body would be attached forever, then the power to speak would be forever. And that means that the power of the soul to produce words is endless. Now, just like it can produce words endlessly, it can also write words endlessly. Because the power to make the movement of an A or a B, okay, that energy is an infinite energy. Because you can make how many A's and how many B's can you write from your soul without an end. However, even though the force behind the movement is a limitless power, the force behind the movement, but the actual movement itself is a finite movement. In other words, what it's producing, what that power is producing is it's writing the letter A. The letter A is a very fixed letter. It's only an A. It's only an Aleph. It's not a Beis. It's not a Gimel. It's a very defined movement. But yet the power producing it is an infinite power. So this is an example of a force that's infinite, but its production is finite. So the lights of Atzilus, not the lights, the vessels of Atzilus, although they themselves are infinite in the true sense of infinity, God's infinity, but they're creating finite pieces, which are the finite worlds. Well, pretty interesting finite pieces. They're creating a universe where we still don't see the end of it, with billions and billions and billions of galaxies and endless, but it's still finite. The idea that the power of a person to write is endless, or to move. How many movements can a person do technically? The movement he's talking about writing, but really every movement. How many moves can you do? Dance moves. How many? The month of Adar, you can infinitely dance, infinitely move. The beat can go on and on and on, and all rhythms as you can move. How many? It's limitless. There can be movements, or to write letters ad ein kates, without an end. If there's nobody on the outside stopping you, if someone takes you and puts you into handcuffs, then you can't write. But essentially, the writing can go on and on. Or, as we said earlier, there can be another thing to stop it, is that God, person's neshama leaves their body. So then in the physical, they can't continue writing. But hypothetically, the soul that has the power to move boundlessly. But every movement is limited. Every movement, every dance move you're going to do is one particular move. Every stroke with the pen is one particular stroke. It's a finite product from an infinite power. Or you're writing a letter. Shakol tenua v'ois, every individual tenua and every movement, hem ba'oifen mesuyam or mugbal, is in a very specified and defined manner. Harei zeb mekayach hagvul dafka. More than that, think about it. This limitless power of movement has to have breaks to it. Because if every time you turn on the faucet of movement, think about that. Think about it like a valve. Okay, I'm going to move my body now. Okay, let's turn on the faucet to move. Turn it on. The spigot would give off this infinite power of movement. Then you would not be able to restrain it and write one letter and then leave go. It would be an endless script letter that would go on and on and on and on without being able to stop the hand, because you released an infinite energy. Think about it. The power essentially is infinite. And but yet you have to be able to have a restraining power that cuts it off. So within the power of limitless movement, inherently in it is also a stopping power that stops it, that chops it into pieces for it to have boundaries. So that power, so again, the limitation is not only in the A, it's not only in the product. Okay, so I wrote an A on the paper, so the A is limited. No. The movement that you stroked your hand to move the A was a limited movement. But that limited movement is coming from a limitless power. So here you have a little bit of a convergence of infinite and finite. What do you see over here? What you're really seeing over here is that there is a state where you have a finite power, but the finite power to produce finite effects is really a limitless power. The essential power is a limitless power, although its projection is with finite expressions. Finite expressions of an infinite power. So similar to that, we use that as an example that the kelim of Atzilut each one of them is an infinite power. Yet its effects are finite things that it produces. Kiv and shemagbel tnuos. So what he's saying is, so also the finite power in a person to make finite movements, even that is infinite. Because you can make infinite finite movements like that. So you see, even the finite power of movement, whether it's the movement of the hand to write, is really infinite. Since you're producing limited movements and letters, but how many? Without an end. What you see over here is that the power that's limited, who really beli gavuli, is really infinite. Because the content of the power of movement or writing that is really infinite, hulahaniya, is to cause a movement, or to write, tnuos, movements, specified movements and specified letters. Which is through the power of Gevul. So which means like this, inherently the power to move, to write, to all of that, inherently it's a limited power. What do we mean it's a limited power? It's meant to project limited energies. But yet that itself, it can do so limitlessness, in a limitless manner. So that shows you that even the power of limitation that's in a person is really a limitless power in the soul. So that's the idea of the vessels of Atzilus. They are powers to affect limitation. They produce limitation, but they are part of God's limitlessness. The power of Gevul is beli Gevul, is infinite. It's really beli Gevul, but it's a koyach hamagbil, it's a power that limits. The loike koyach habeli Gevul. There is a power in the infinite which produces infinity. There is a power of the infinite, like if the lights would be not through the vessels, that what God is portraying through the lights themselves is his infinity. If the lights would be released not through vessels, their production would be infinite. The light would shine infinite on infinitum, without an end. The lights in the vessels is this combination of finite. It's a power to limit, but it's an infinite power. That's the same infinite power. They affect limitation. And this effect is only in the lower worlds, as we say, on the paper, which is considered a lower world. When God is writing on the paper, which is into the lower worlds, that's where you're ending up with finite fixtures or finite entities. But they themselves are limitless. But this is, he continues, the next paragraph is only in the world of Atzilus. Which in general, we said the world of Atzilus is still the world of Ma, which Ma means it's dominated by energy, which is attached to source. So even the vessels are also attached to the source. And therefore even the vessels are close to him, and therefore even they are infinite like he is infinite. Even if they're affecting finitude, they're only affecting finitude, but they're really finite. Shesham Gama Kalim, because in Atzilus, even the vessels are in a state of essential bittul. Which is not the case in the worlds of the three lower worlds. Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya. Heichel ma'olam Bria, beginning with the world of creation. Sheboy maschel inyan ayeshus. That's where the real somethingness starts. And when we say somethingness, we see it means something that feels itself apart from God. Not as God's power to limit or God's power to be defined, but God portraying himself as something. But rather the something starts becoming something that thinks it's really something other than God. That too comes from God's name. To understand that even the breakaway from God, so to speak, in creation, where things get disconnected from God's ultimate truth that there's none but him, even that is it's one of God's cool effects. And that's why that one of God's coolest effects is Shem Ban, that he can produce things that are really things, even though they're really nothing but him. But he can, but in their perception and in their experience, they should really be something other than him. To the point that we can end up with free will, that we can completely go in the opposite direction of where he wants us to go. And yet that too is also only him. But that's all coming from one of his names, which is the name Ban, which is the name to produce Yeshus. Omnam Gamba Olam is Biyah, however, notwithstanding the fact that Biyah, Bria Tzir and Asiya, is the opposite. It's the world that pulls into itself, not to its source. A world that drifts away from God, not into God. But even in Biyah, Yesh Inyana Oiros, there's also lights. Biyah also has lights, which means God created Biyah not to drift away from him completely. God gave the world's Bria, Tzir and Asiya, what do you call it? Like a hook that they can hook themselves back up to God. They're not doomed to drift away infinitely and endlessly into their somethingness. They're not doomed to be forever separated from him. And that's because they also have lights. They don't just have vessels. Just like we said earlier that even in Atzilus there is vessels, we're saying now the opposite, that even in Bria, Tzir, and Asiya, there's also lights. That even in Ban, there is also Ma. There's also something. Even in our bodies, there's also a neshama that keeps us attached to God. If we would only have a body, we would drift away into our soul keeps us in check, keeps us constantly getting back in line, even when we drift away a little bit. So, commission is Ba'ala, and commission is Ba'ala El, just like we said earlier. Shegam be'pchenas Ban, that even in Ban, Yeshem Ma. The name Ma attaches itself even to the name Ban. And that's the Ma, the Ban. That's the Ma of the Ban. The Yuvan said this will be understood by Avodas HaMalachim. Who are the creatures from the world of Bria and the world of Yetzirah? Who are these creatures? We are creatures in the world of Asiya. Who are the creatures of Bria and Yetzirah? Those are the angels. So we find that even though angels are not God, they have already a consciousness of self, yet they too have moments of total nullification into God, which means they too have moments of Ma. But their moments of Ma is different than the vessels of Atzilus. The vessels of Atzilus, the Ma that reaches the vessels of Atzilus is inherent to them. As he said earlier, it's organic. And that's why they are in naturally just one with God. It's God's power. It's not something else. Angels are already an entity. They are something who get informed. They have moments of enlightenment where they realize that they're really nothing and there's nothing but God. But that's already an enlightenment that comes to enlighten them. Inherently, they feel separated. Because again, we have to look. These three worlds are dominated by Ban, and Ban is disconnect. Ban is a name that creates separation. It's just within the separation we infuse some Ma into it. And we find this in the service of the angels, the Chsiv. It says by them, angels, what's his name? Ezekiel, I think. Yecheskel, yeah. He had a vision of the divine chariot and of everything, and he saw all the angelic beasts. And he saw the angels, and he saw them that they have wings and they fly. They stay. But then it says that then they stand. Ba'amdam, they suddenly stand attention, and they drop their wings. So you would think that with their wings, when they're soaring, they're on a higher level. And when they stop, they're like birds that land, and no. It's the opposite. When they sit still, they're in a much higher level. Because when they're flapping their wings represent their own emotions, their feelings, their excitement. The movement of the wing is the movement of the excitement. Two wings, one is love of God, one is fear of God. They experience intense love and experience fear, but love and fear is an expression of their own desire. They love God, they fear God. But then there is a moment when they become so overwhelmed by God's all-pervading reality that they can't love anybody, they can't fear because their I dissolves. That's a moment of Ma that affects the angels. That even in the world of Ban, they have a moment of enlightenment where it cancels their somethingness. But it's considered an outside force. It's not organic, it's not their natural state. Their natural state is to flap their wings and to be very excited. This is the idea of the service of the angels, with love and fear. Kamoy Gavriel, the angel Gavriel, his main energy is Be'yira, fear. In Michael, and the angel Michael, his main energy, Michael, Ba'ava, is in love. But Pchenas Yesh Misha Oyev, that has a sense of self. There is somebody who is loving. Sheyesh Bezeh Beis Pirushim, there's two Pirushim, what it means, somebody that's loving. Pirush Echad, one Pirush, Shu Pchenas Yesh. V'oived Avadasei Ba'ava, that the angel himself feels himself, and he serves God with love. Yesh Misha Oyev, again, regarding the angels, it says that they are a Yesh Misha Oyev. So that could, the Rebbe is saying over here that it could be understood in two meanings. Number one is that the word Yesh, what's the opposite of a compliment? Derogatory. I don't want to say derogatory, but that's the deficiency. The lack of quality is that, yes, they're separate. They feel themselves. And then it's, even though they're a yesh, even though they're a something, and they have ego and they have a self, yet, Misha Oyev, they love God. So the fact that they love God, that's a plus. Let's put it this way. The minus is that there is a yesh, that they feel themselves. Now, the plus is they love God and they fear God. But then there is a deeper explanation, he says. When you say Yesh Misha Oyev on the angels, that there is somebody that loves, it's not a plus, it's not a minus and then a plus, it's two minuses. Yesh, there is somebody that's a minus. When I say minus, I mean they're created that way, it's not their fault, but concept. It's a minus in the sense that they are not in tune with ultimate truth, because they feel themselves, they're somebody. And then Misha Oyev, the fact that they love, it's another minus. Because their love too is expressing that there is somebody here who's loving, which means it's not the ultimate truth of God, that there's none but him. It doesn't say that the vessels of Atzilus love God. The vessels of Atzilus are God. There's nobody, they're not loving God. Because they are him. They're not love. They love the world. They love creations because they're God loving the world. They're God's love. They're not, so they can't love God. But the angels, they're already disconnected. So even their love is something to be, is for them not to be proud of. That too is like a certain, from the ultimate truth, it's something to be ashamed with, that they're loving. I'm loving God. But the fact that there is an I that's loving is that's what he's saying. There's two meanings in Yesh Misha Oyev. He's a something. His service, his plus is that he serves God with love. Pirush Abay is the second Pirush. Shu ba'oimek yoser is deeper. Shegam ava atzma, even love itself, hu b'chinas yeshus, that itself is somethingness. Omnam gam lePirush Abay, however, even according to the second interpretation, that there is something lacking in their love, because their love too is somethingness, yet the angels have a moment that they transcend that they're not b'chinas yesh. They have moments that they're able to go past that. And when is that? When they're enlightened. When? That's what it means. When they stand, they drop their wings. So when they drop their wings means they now entered into a higher state, that they don't exist. Only God is. Self-effacement. That's the ma that reaches the ban. However, just like we said earlier, that's not who they are. That's like they're captivated by something that's influencing them. Naturally, they are a self, because they're created to be a self. It's a superimposed humility. It's not their essential state. We said earlier, remember, there's two types of humble people. Somebody who's essentially humble, and somebody who is learned how to be humble. It's a different thing. It is known that the angel, when an angel is being sent on a mission, see, what do angels do all day long? All day long they sit and they sing to God, and they're busy expressing their love and their awe for God. But once in a while, God calls an angel out and sends him on a mission. When the angel gets dispatched on a mission, at that moment, he loses himself completely to the mission. And he becomes like an extension of God's hand in the world. He's no more somebody. And that's why the angel can then speak in the name of God and said, I say to do so and so. What do you mean you? Who are you? He's not I. The angel is not I. The angel is God speaking through the angel. Because the angel has become melted from its existence into God. The angel at the time of his shlichus becomes completely nullified from his existence till he is able to call himself in the name of God. Like it says, she called the name of God who spoke to her. Now it says explicitly that an angel spoke to her. This is talking about by Hagar. She says she called the name of God who spoke to her, but God didn't speak to her, the angel spoke to her. The answer is when the angel is coming on a mission from God, the angel is God. And then the angel who came to Abraham and told him not to slaughter Isaac when Isaac was, he then tells Abraham, I'm swearing with me, which is the angel is swearing in the name of God, but with me. He doesn't say in God's name, he says in me. Hold it, you're not God. The answer is at that moment, the angel has become so canceled that it's God. At the time of shlichus, at the time of a shlichus, a time when you're sent on a mission, the entire existence of the agent is the existence of the sender. That's the real meaning of the Rebbe's shluchim, that their entire existence is the Rebbe, not themselves. Venimtza comes out, comes out that in the service of angels, there's two levels. The natural state of the malachim itself, of the angel, that's the body of the malachim. The body, it is known that angels have a body. Their body is yesh. And that's the ban inside of them. Now, this idea that angels have a body, we learn from what it says in Psalm 104, Baruch Nafshi, which we're going to say tomorrow, Rosh Chodesh. It says, Oisam halachav ruchais, Hashem makes his angels be spirits. Misharsav, his attendants, eish loat, flaming fire. But the fact that he says he makes his angels spirits also means he makes his angels, he makes them out of wind and fire, which means that they have some substance to their existence, which makes them finite, limited creatures. Even though they can't compare it to the density of the human condition, because we are made up, physical creatures of the physical world, made up of four elements, and our four elements are the more thicker elements, include earth and water, which are denser. They don't have water, they have the more subtle, only wind and fire. But wind and fire is also considered something. This is still a body. Their bodies, their fire and their water, which make up their body, which make them become very much something, that they have a sense of self very strongly. Let's understand something. It's not disconnected because what are they doing with their self? Their entire self is to sing to God, is to love God, but it's still they feel themselves. But that's called their ban of their ban. In other words, in general, since they inhabit the lower world, they're part of the world of ban. They're not part of the world of ma. Atzilus is ma. They're not the world of energy, they're the world of vessels. They're the world of creation. They're the world of separation. They're a world of limitation. But their bodies is the ban of the ban, is the thickness. In addition to this, they also have the light inside of them. What's their light? Their soul that's in the angels. And what's that? That's when God sends them on a mission, for example. That's when the light comes shining through them. Their energy comes, and then they're beyond wind and fire. Then they have a soul. They have a power. And that makes them dissolve. Like the neshama is able to bring bittul in our bodies. Neshama. According to the first pirush, that their love and their fear is already holy. Remember, we said the first pirush is that they are yesh. Well, when they serve God with love and fear, that's already an upgrade, because the love and the fear. But then we said the second pirush is that even the love and the fear is yesh. So according to the first pirush, the neshama of the angel is that they love. The body of the angel is that they have an eye and that they want to eat pancakes. But then, because they have a neshama, they love God and they fear God. So they don't care about pancakes and they only want to love God and fear God. So that's already an upgrade. According to the second interpretation, no. Their love and their fear too comes from their body because it's I am loving, I am fearing. And the real idea of their neshama is that they are able to completely dissolve themselves and not beyond love, as we're going to say. Ubefrat inyan shlichus, especially when they're in a state of shlichus. As we say, when they're in a shlichus, they're much higher than even love and fear. This is their ma that's in their ban. And it's understood from all of this. Now we can understand that the vessels of Atzilus, which are called the ban of the ma, are way, way above, incomparably higher than the vessels of the three lower worlds. The ban of the ban. The ban of the ban, the vessels of the bodies of the angels can't compare in any way to the vessels of the kelim of Atzilus. Ki b'pchinas ba'daman, because the ban of the ma, shu inyan kelim d'Atzilus, which are the vessels of Atzilus, harin is bar le'el, we said earlier, shabitul shalahem ubitul atzmi. They're not superimposed upon them, bitul. Intrinsically, they are close to God. Intrinsically, they are one with Him. It's not like they're being inspired to be batal. Their entire existence is bittul because they're part of the world of Atzilus, and the world of Atzilus is created to be. It's not even created. It's emanated as an emanation of the divine. That's what it is. So even the vessels are the divine, and there's no such a thing, even a moment, that the vessels of Atzilus slip into a state where they love God. They are Him. Even in their darkest moment, they're Him. They're never, ever, ever feel themselves to the point that they're not Him. There's no such a thing. But the vessels of the angels, that's already real limitation, real separation. And that's the reason shakelim datzilus einam tzrichim tikkun. That's why we know that in Atzilus, there's no tikkun. We don't have to fix anything in Atzilus. Atzilus is a perfect world. All the work that we do to fix and to rectify is only in the three lower worlds, because there is true separation. And the reason why Atzilus doesn't need any fixing, lefishem b'pchinas bitul atzmi, because they are essentially batal, nullified and one. Mas she'en kein b'pchinas ban de ban, but the ban of the ban, harei ma'acha shebe'etzem mitziyasam b'pchinas yesh. Essentially, it is something. As we said earlier, the bittul that they have because God calls them and sends them on a shlichus is a superimposed moment that they are God. Since God is speaking to them, He knocks the wind out of them and they don't feel themselves anymore for the time that they're doing their work. But it's not natural to who they are. Yesh tzorech ba'avoda. They need special service. Sheyizbatlu mitziyasam. It's not natural. It's not the natural state. They need to either love and feed. They have to work on nullifying their existence. So this concludes chapter 4. Let's. I'm not going to finish chapter 5. I'm just going to start it. And this is the main difference. Shebein oisi is the ma, between the letters of ma. Shem b'pchinas bitul atzmi. The letters, remember, letters are always ban. The letters of ma, which are bitul atzmi, and that's bringing it back to the stones. That's called heavenly stones. It's a stone, and a stone has weight. It's letters, it's weight, it's something. But it's the ban of Aleph. Now that's interesting. The word even is Aleph ban. Now, what's the significance? Aleph represents the name of 45 is Aleph. Why? Because how do you get the 45? How do you get the 45? You fill all the letters with Alephs. It's called Milui Aleph. So when you have the letter Aleph, it indicates the or, the light. What's the letters in Even, which means stone, Beis Nun? It means the ban of the Aleph, the expression of the bittul, the kalim of Atzilus. They're called Even, they're called stone. That's the means it's divine made words. It means there's nothing there but divinity. It's God, the way God is shaping himself into something. There's nothing but him. That's all that it is. But bricks is already where God translates those letters to become a language of creation. And that's the three lower worlds, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah, are made up of bricks. They're not made up of stones. Stones is in Atzilus. This means stones that come from heaven. And La'oisi is the ban, but that's very different than the letters of ban. Shemchinas bittul yesh bilvad. There is bittul there. There is a yesh, but the yesh is batal, fine. V'inyan levenim, and that is called bricks. Shebedei adam, that is made by people. V'yadam nasa binyan ha'ir u'migdal d'kedusha. Now, once you have stones, what do you got to do with stones? With stones, we create with stones, we can create the Mishkan. With stones, we can create Jerusalem. We can build Jerusalem. We're going to build a city, and we're going to build a tower. Let's understand, it's the fact that God emanates vessels, and then that God emanates not just a higher level of vessels, but lower kinds of vessels, which are angels and then creatures and creations. It's not a bad thing. Quite on the contrary. It's what he wants. He wants a city. He wants a structure. He wants an empire. An empire can't be an empire without people, without entities. So that's called building Jerusalem, building the city of God, Ir Elokeinu. What do you use to build the city of God? You use stones and you use bricks. And he's going to differentiate. Jerusalem itself, in concept, is built with bricks, although I know Jerusalem is built with Jerusalem stone, but just for a moment. The city itself can be built with bricks, but the palace, the Migdal, where God himself resides, that has to be built with stone. That means, what's the difference? Stone is bittul b'metzias. It's essentially nullified to the source, as we said earlier. Bricks, the bricks, which can also, like we said, angels are bricks, but they too can be nullified if you build, if you construct the, like if you're using your somethingness to serve God, like the angels who are using their somethingness to say, God, I love you. Or if we're created to be something and we use ourselves to do God's will. What the Rebbe is saying is we can construct a world for God both with stones and with bricks. Stones obviously are going to be placed in the more inner courtyard, in the inner structure that is going to facilitate God himself. For that, there can't be even the subtlest feeling of somethingness. It has to be complete nullification. For God to reside somewhere, it has to be completely nullified to him. But the more outer structure can be built from bricks, and God wants that. God knows that our service, even if we feel ourselves, when we bend our egos to do his will, we can build for him. That's called a city and building a tower. The tower is the Beis HaMikdash. That has to be built with stone. The city itself can be built with bricks. That's the holy structure we built for God. Then there's the Babylonian tower, which is when we use language and when we use words and when we use the whole construction site to build something opposite, to build the world a godless existence, to build the world that's going to be the Tower of Babel. And that is completely built with bricks. There's no godly stones in that. It's purely brick. That's why when they were building their tower and their migdal, they built it all from bricks. Because they didn't have bittul. They didn't want bittul. That's the whole thing. Now, bricks can be two things. Stones are inherently bittul. I mean, the concept of stones, they're inherently bittul. So there was no way they would be able to use stones to build their Nimrod tower, their rebellious tower. They couldn't use stones. Now, bricks, however, you can use in two ways. It means once you have ego, now you can use your ego in two ways. One way is to nullify your ego to God's will, and the other one is to use your ego to sin, to go off and do what the ego wants. To build the tower of evil, or to build the tower for God. That's where the mimer is now going to go, to explain the difference of these two types of construction. Okay, we have to leave something for next class. So today we learned, let's see how much we learned. We learned chapter 4. Oh, chapter 4. Let's finish the first paragraph of chapter 4. A little further. Val Yadam, and through both the stones and the bricks, Nasa Binyan Ir, we build up a city, Migdal the Kedusha, and a tower of holiness. The Inyan Ir, what is the idea of the city? Humashakos of Ir Elokeinu. We build a city for God. That means a city that facilitates God. So let me explain what that is. In addition to building Jerusalem or building any structure that is holy, like building the temple, or building a shul in anywhere, or building a community of course, but it also means the usage of language, of words, to communicate God's will. All building a city of God, bringing divine consciousness through language to the world. Torah study, production of Torah, writing words of Torah, publishing books. It's all creating a city for God, because a city is built from words. It's built from letters. It's built from stones. Now, for example, it's explained in certain places that when you speak Torah in the holy tongue, in Hebrew, in Lashon HaKodesh, then you're using stones, because the holy tongue. God made those letters. But if you're speaking Torah in English, Spanish, French, Russian, Chinese, any language, you're using bricks. But you're still building a home for God. Because when someone reads that book, they become conscious of God, of the purpose of life, the purpose of what God wants you to live, so on and so forth. That's all part of the construction of holiness in the world. So the city is Mashakos of Ir Elokeinu, the city of God. The Inyan Migdal, and what's the Migdal? The Migdal, the tower. In the city there is a tower. What does that mean? Mashakos of Migdal Oiz Shem Havaya. The tower of strength of the name Havaya. Now, one of the things to notice is when it speaks about the city, it says Ir Elokeinu, uses the name Elokim. When it talks about the tower, it uses the name Havaya. And that's the reason why for the Migdal you use stones, for the tower, and for the city you can use bricks. That means in the city it's not so sensitive that it has to be from people who are utterly nullified, egoless completely. You don't need Moshe Rabbeinu to build a city. Everybody can chip in, even if you're full of self and ego. You surrender yourself to God. That's the idea. The city is called on the name of Elokim. Which is the source of the vessels. The Migdal that's a tower, that's high up, and protrudes upward to the sky from the city. Nekras al Shem Havaya, that has the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei to it. Shumakara Oiros, which is the source of lights. Havaya in general is the source of light, and Elokim is the source of vessels. We discussed earlier that in Havaya itself, there is 52 and 45. But in general, and I mentioned that last week, Havaya is the source is mainly the name 45, which is the source of the lights, and Elokim is the source of the vessels. And in order to construct the city and the tower of holiness, you can build even with bricks. That are made, they're man-made. However, this type of a construct to God means that even though there is ego, but the ego is surrendering itself to God's will. This is the idea of constructing the city. And afterwards, once you achieved already a surrender in your life, that your life is following according to the Shulchan Aruch, you're following all the laws, even though you have ego, but you're still complying with God's will. You can reach a much higher level. You can open yourself up to your neshama, to a much deeper, higher level of consciousness, until you reach a point where you uncover your consciousness of your soul. At Einod Mavad, there's no ego at all. You become like a level of a tzaddik that has no self at all. So that's a higher level, and that's when you're building the tower. It's a much deeper level of bittul. That's through stones, shebidei shamayim, that is made by God. God made stones. The Inyan Biktsara and the idea, I was going to stop here, but I'm not. The Inyan Biktsara and the idea in short. In the Isser B'Yerushalmi, it says in the Jerusalem Talmud, Al Pasuk, V'asim Dvarei B'Picha. There's a verse that says, I will put my words in your mouth. U'b'tzeil yadi kisisicha, and with the shadow of my hands I cover you. L'ntoya shamayim, to spread out the heaven. V'lisay daretz, and to establish the earth. V'leimar l'tzion, and to say to Zion, Ami ata, you are my people. There's such a verse. It's a verse in 37 in Isaiah 51. And the Jerusalem Talmud says like this: We've searched all of Scripture. We don't find that the Jewish people are called Tzion. Tzion usually is the name of Jerusalem. But there's one verse where the Jewish people themselves, the people, are called Zion. I guess there the concept comes to Zionists. Okay? Shem Tzion, the people are called Zion. Only in this verse. Because here it says, Leimar Letzion. God says, let's say to Tzion, Ami Ata, you're my people, referring to the people. Fine. What does that mean? Because Zion is something very high. What does Zion mean? The word, that's why people hate. You see, why is everything is anti-Zion? Zion. Oh, Zion. The biggest people are like, I'm not talking in the Jewish world to be anti-Zionist, because that was talking about the world, the outside, Gentile world, that a lot of people are anti the Zion. Because because Tzion is the ultimate state of bittul. A world that is in a state of complete unification with God is called Tzion. Because Tzion means a mark. A mark, like you put a mark. When our entire existence is to be a symbol for God, you're a marker for God. That's all you are. You have no other business, no other self at all. That's Zion. A world that, God forbid, doesn't want to be in a state of nullification. A world that wants to, these fakakta people, boys and girls, I'm sorry for saying that, but I'm going to say it 3 times. These fakakta people again, that today stood in Colombia with their ridiculous shmatas, headscarves, and with their faces covered. You ever realize they always cover their faces? Because there's no human face to these people. And are screaming, Palestine, Palestine, free, free, Palestine. Well, this fuck the people. What's motivating it? Not in the world, unless they're being paid by Soros or somebody. What's motivating this insanity? You know? And they're calling for Antifada. That's what they said. I heard today the chants. What was the chant today in Colombia? Was it? Only solution is Antifada, which means Antifada means murdering Jews. So why are they so hell-bent on it? Because they want to keep the pronouns, the they, them. They want to live in a world where God doesn't exist. They can do whatever they want. They want to have the language of their own language. They want to have a language that is totally antithetical to God's language. And therefore, their antithesis is Zion, is someone who's totally the opposite. Total nullification to God. There's nothing to the human experience other than an expression of the divine. So, going back to what we're learning over here. How we, as human beings, have ego? How can my people, who were created to be separate, to have self, become so attached to me, God says, that I can call them Zion, which means just an expression of me, just a symbol for me. Just like the Holy Temple is just a symbol for God. That's why the Holy Temple is called Zion. How can people be on the level of the temple itself? Be totally bittul b'metzias? So that's when you're studying Torah. God says, I put my words into your mouth. Because when we're speaking Torah, we're not working with bricks, we're working with stones. Because these are God's words coming through us. Just like the angel, we said earlier, when the angel is on a message, on a mission, then he can be called in the name of God. So too, when we speak Torah, we can be called Zion, Sion. I put my mouth in your mouth. I put my words in your mouth, God says. We become Sion, and we build the Migdal. That's the Migdal. That's the tower. Sion is the tower. The city is Jerusalem. Sion is the tower in Jerusalem. That's the temple itself. And this means it's while a Yid is doing a mitzvah. That's the point. It's not only Torah. It's when you're doing a mitzvah or when you're engaged in prayer. It's being connected to God through one of the 3 channels. Torah, Avodah, Gemilas, Chasadim. When you're doing one of those 3 channels, you dissolve into God and God is your existence. And that's called stones. When are we bricks? When we're engaged in what's called Kol Masechel L'Shem Shamayim, when we're not doing mitzvahs, when we're living our regular everyday life, but we're doing them with godly intent. That's already a brick. It's already a state of somethingness, but you're surrendering it to God. So serving God and everything else other than Torah and mitzvahs is called bricks. But when we are serving Hashem in Torah and mitzvahs, then we rise to a level of Zion, which is Migdal, which is produces that's the Beis Hamikdash. It's the tower of Havaya. It's the level of lights. And even if there's vessels there, the vessels are completely surrendered to the lights, like we discussed earlier. That's what stones are. You're speaking Torah, halacha, that's the word of God. Torah, that's the Torah. I put my words in your mouth. And that's called Torah goes inside the person. That's why it's called, God says, I put my words inside you, inside your mouth. The Torah enters inside of us into our intestines, into our stomach. God says, then there's another verse that says, and the continuation of that verse, it says, and in the shadow of my hand, I cover you. That's when you're doing a mitzvah. Mitzvahs, that's the mitzvahs. These are encompassing energies. Mitzvahs are called garments. They're like a shadow that hovers above us. He covers us. That's the garments. That happens through kindness, acts of kindness, which are mitzvahs. And to plant the heavens and to cause the foundation of earth. That's the prayer sacrifices, which are all about attaching heaven to earth. The sages say, if not for the stationary people who would stand during the time of the sacrifices, they're called mamadis. Mamadis were the Jews who participated in the sacrifices, not the Kohanim, but the non-Kohanes who would stand there and offer prayers, and they were very much a part and parcel of the service of the sacrifices. It says regarding them, if not for them, that heaven and earth would not have a continuation. To spread the heaven and to found the earth. Shekim Shemayim va'aretz u'aydei karbonos is through the sacrifices. U'meshachara Beis Hamikdash, when the Beis Hamikdash has been destroyed, that's accomplished through the service of prayer. Shenyanai, again, and in prayer too, we see the connection of heaven and earth, because prayer is called a ladder that stands on the earth and reaches the heaven. Shu'inyan sulam mutzav arza. It says by Yaakov that there was a ladder that stands on the ground, v'roishay magia shamayim, and its tip reaches to the heavens. So that's like a ladder that goes from the earth to the heaven. And the Zohar says that's referring to prayer. That's why we see in prayer that the beginning of prayer starts off in lower levels of consciousness. For example, we say, God, you didn't make me a Gentile. God, you didn't make me a servant, a slave. And then we work our way up higher to higher levels of consciousness. And the tip reaches the heaven. And then we reach the nullification of Shema, Ushmona Esrei and Shmona Esrei. Baruch Ata Havaya. You're standing literally in front of God. You're saying, blessed are you, God. So you're at such a high level. And not only that, the person is standing above Yud Kei Vav Kei. And you're drawing God's energy down into Yud Kei Vav Kei. Baruch Ata Havaya. You, Yud Kei Vav Kei, should be blessed. That means the person is bringing energy into God, into the level of God called Havaya. So you start off by just barely differentiating yourself from a Gentile, and then you go higher and higher and higher and higher and higher to the highest levels. Which the summary of this is that through the service in these three pathways of Torah, Avodah, Gemilas, Chasad, Nasem Yisrael b'B'chinas Tzion, we become in a state of Tzion. Shu B'chinas, what does that mean? We become Migdal Oz, we become the tower of strength, Shem Havaya. That's absolute unification with God. And this is not a contradiction to this that we said earlier. That the three lower worlds, which we are part of the three lower worlds. Not only are we part of the three lower worlds, we live in the lowest world. Since they are in a state of yesh, we can't have real bittul, the ma, that we said. We intrinsically were created to be something. We can't reach that level of total bittul like in Atzilut. Ki olam is biyah atzmam b'bchinas yesh. Because the olamos biyah are in a state of yesh. Va'abitulu medavar shechutz mehem. And even when they're bottled because they're influenced by a superimposed realization, but it's not intrinsic, and therefore we can never step out of our limitation. So that's true regarding the worlds. But here we're talking about the Jewish people who possess a soul. And the soul comes from Atzilut. Since our souls are from Atzilut, the Jewish soul could have the experience of total bittul. And God says, La'ami, to my people, I can say, you are Zion. You have that. You can be in the state of just being almost like we are God's body in this world. A continuation of Him. Nothing separated of Him. All neshamas come from the world of emanation, from Atzilut. And even though our souls come down into this world, and it seems like, wow, that our consciousness gets thickened and impacted by it. In essence, we always remain divine. Be'etzem mohusam, in our essence. And therefore this level of bittul is not foreign to us. It's who we are. I just watched one of the hostages today being interviewed. One of these hostages who came out starved. The time they let out 3 hostages, they looked totally like they came out of the concentration camps. So he was being interviewed today. He still looks so thin and he was basically said to the interviewer in Hebrew, before I was taken to captivity, I never said Shema Yisrael in my life. I never said Hero Israel. And when I was there wasn't a day that I didn't say Shema Yisrael. He says, where? She says, somehow, he says, in that situation, the amunah, the faith, it just opens up. And you sense there's a higher power. You know it's there. You know there is a higher power watching you. You have it. It's intrinsic to the Jew. You can get distracted by it, but it's who we are in our essence. The divinity of the soul is inextinguishable. It's the essence of the person. Because the soul, even when it's in a body, is always a piece of God from above. And not only that, and mamish. We don't only say that it's a piece of God, but we add the word the mamish to indicate it literally is a piece of God from above. And the one that reveals that is the one whose name begins with the word mamish, reveals how every Jew is mamish, a piece of God from above. That's why every Jew can reach the level of Tzion. This is the idea of the tower, which is the name of Havaya. And in addition to this, in our holy work, there's also the work of Hava Nilbal Levanim. We also have a holy work of making bricks. And let us burn it. We can make imitation stones and turn the bricks into stones in a good way. This is a positive way. By what? We said earlier that this was done in the past in an evil way. And then the people came down to Egypt to fix that. But this too exists in a holy manner as well, to take bricks and make them stones. That means that even when you're not doing mitzvahs and you're not learning Torah, even in everyday conversing, so you're dealing with real materials of the world, if you add a little spice of bittul, if you say, I'm doing this, l'kavod Shabbos, to honor the Shabbos, I'm doing this to help me have strength to serve God, you're adding to inherently actions that serve the limited existence, and you're adding a divine mindfulness to it. You're turning those bricks also and building a structure for God with that structure, with that as well. The bricks that are man-made, this is the rectification of the name ban. But over here, you have to burn it. See, a stone, you can build with it without burning it. But a brick, you first have to take it and put it in an oven. That means when you're taking, in order to take things that are not godly and convert them to become a home for God, you got to burn them in your oven of Shema. In other words, how do you create an oven, a holy oven, to make the bricks? Every day when you say Shema, and you fill yourself with love of God, and you create a holy heat, a holy temperature, get excited from the unity of God, and then you take basically everything we do during the day, we're supposed to bring into our Shema. And that burns it and takes it out of its thickness and coarseness and turns it into a brick that can serve as a home for God. When you take the bricks and put them in the oven, they become like a stone. That the bricks became stones. Until these bricks can become almost like heavenly stones, as we will see. in the next class, next Thursday, he's going to say, but what happened in Egypt? What does it mean to build an unholy tower? How do we fix it? And based on that, we'll understand what does it mean that under God's feet, the bricks were stone, or they weren't stone, they were like stone. We're going to get to that, Bezrat Hashem, in next week's one more week to complete this. Thank you for joining.